You ever look at a giant tree and then think about the tiny little seed it came from? It's kind of mind-blowing, right? How does the entire plan for that fit inside something you can hold between two fingers? It seems impossible, but it's actually one of the most incredible processes in all of nature.
Seriously though, how does it know what to do? How does it know to build roots first, then a stem, then leaves, and not, a flower underground? Well, it's not random, not at all. It's all part of a very specific, very clever plan.
And this whole process, what scientists just call development, it really comes down to just two main parts. You can think of it like the plant has its own secret playbook for life. Okay, so part one is growth. Pretty straightforward, right? That's just the plant getting bigger. And once it's bigger, it doesn't shrink back. Then part two is differentiation. This is where things get really cool. It's where all those new cells get assigned specific jobs. You're going to be a root cell. You're going to be part of a leaf. So growth is like building the team, and differentiation is like giving everyone their position on the field.
All right, so let's dive into that first step, growth. How do plants do it? Because unlike us, they have this amazing strategy that lets them just keep growing and growing their whole lives. It's pretty unique.
The secret? It's all in these special spots called meristems. The best way to think about them is like permanent construction zones at the very tips of the roots and the shoots. They're just constantly churning out new cells, like little growth factories. That's the reason a tree can just keep getting taller for centuries. This amazing ability is called an open form of growth, and it's all because of these meristems.
And we can actually track this growth with math. There are two basic ways it happens. Sometimes it's what we call arithmetic growth. That's a slow and steady linear pace. Think one new cell, then another, then another. But the real fireworks happen with geometric growth. That's where every new cell can also divide. And that's when you get this explosive, exponential chain reaction. And if you want to see the power of geometric growth, just look at this number. A single watermelon cell, a single cell, can increase its size 350,000 times. That's not a typo. That's how a tiny flower turns into a huge watermelon in just a couple of weeks. It's just, wow. But okay, let's be real. In nature, nothing can grow exponentially forever, right? You'd run out of space, food, water. So most living things follow this classic S-shaped curve. It starts slow, then you get that crazy explosive growth phase, and then it levels off as resources get tight. Makes sense.
All right, so the plant's busy making tons and tons of new cells. But just a big pile of identical cells doesn't make a plant, does it? They need jobs. And that brings us to the second crucial part of the playbook, assigning those positions.
So yeah, this is differentiation. It's the whole process where these brand new generic cells basically grow up. They change their shape and their structure to do a very specific job. It's how one cell becomes, say, a tiny pipe for carrying water, while another becomes a tough skin cell for protection.
So, the big question is, how does a cell know what it's supposed to become? Well, the most important thing to remember here is location, location, location. Seriously, a cell's final job is pretty much decided by where it ends up. For example, if a cell gets pushed to the very, very front of a growing root, it becomes part of the tough, protective root cap. But if it gets pushed to the side, it becomes part of the outer skin.
Okay, so we've got growth and we've got differentiation, but who's in charge? What's the master coordinator telling all these cells what to do and when to do it? Well, it turns out there's a whole team of invisible coaches running the show, and they're all chemical.
They're called plant growth regulators, or PGRs for short. And what are they? They're basically tiny little chemical messengers, little molecules that send out signals to control everything, from how fast the plant grows to how the cells differentiate. They are the ones calling all the plays from the playbook.
So, let's meet the coaching staff. These PGRs basically fall into two camps. On one side, you have the promoters, your offensive line, if you will. These are guys like auxins, gibberellins, and cytokinins, and their job is to push for more growth, more cells, more action. Then on the other side, you have the inhibitors, like ethylene and abscisic acid. They're more like the defensive coordinators, managing things like aging, ripening, and handling stressful situations.
Okay, so it's one thing to know the roster, but the real magic is seeing these coaches in action. So let's look at a few of the plant's greatest plays. Let's start with a classic play called apical dominance, and the head coach here is auxin. So auxin is made at the very top bud of the plant, and it sends a signal down to the side branches that basically says, hey, you guys wait your turn, I'm in charge. And that's why plants tend to grow tall and skinny. But if you snip off that top bud, You get rid of the source of the auxin. Suddenly, those side branches are free to grow. That's literally why people prune hedges and tea bushes, to make them fuller.
Okay, check this out. Next up is gibberellin, the coach that specializes in making things longer. Now think about sugarcane. All the sugar is stored in the stem, so it just makes sense that if you can make the stem longer, you get more sugar. Well, it turns out if you spray the crop with gibberellins, that's exactly what happens. And the result? Yields can go up by as much as 20 tons per acre. That's not just a small boost, that is a total game changer for farming.
All right, here's one you've probably heard before. One rotten apple spoils the whole bunch. We all know the saying, but is it actually true? And if so, why?
Well, it is true, and the culprit is a PGR called ethylene. Here's the kicker. It's a gas. As a fruit ripens and starts to go bad, it releases this ethylene gas. And that gas is a signal to all the other fruit around it, telling them, hey, it's time to ripen now. It sets off this chain reaction that can take a whole fruit bowl from perfectly ripe to, well, rotten really fast.
And finally, let's talk defense. The coach for this is abscisic acid, or ABA. People call it the stress hormone for good reason. Imagine a plant is in a drought and it's losing water fast. ABA is the coach that blows the whistle and tells the plant to batten down the hatches. It sends a signal to all the little pores on the leaves, the stomata, and tells them to slam shut. This stops the plant from losing precious water. It's an absolutely critical survival play.
So, when you put it all together, what you see is this incredible balancing act. It's a constant push and pull, a negotiation between the promoter coaches yelling, go, 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 and the inhibitor coaches saying, whoa, hold on, let's manage this risk. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they're opponents, but this complex chemical conversation is what guides literally everything the plant does. And that leaves us with a pretty deep question to chew on. If a plant's whole life is run by this intricate chemical playbook, constantly responding to signals from the sun, the soil, and from within itself, is it just a passive biological machine? Or is it actually making decisions in its own way? Something to think about the next time you see a tree, or even just a tiny seed.